How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Aleph, Daf 31 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, okay, it's right now Motzei Simchas Torah, so that was good. Yeah, we're now as they were saying at the Beit Chabad, a very amazing Beit Chabad right near me. After Ma'ariv tonight, they said V'Yaakov holach ledarkoi. That then Jacob went on his way after a very fastidious, celebratory few weeks. We are now on our way into the winter to study Masechta Zevachim together. Anyways, wow, this was a busy month, but very good, Baltic. Okay, so today I had hoped to record this yesterday, but did not. I mamish yesterday. I was literally, I was literally working on Babble on Talmud. I would say like up to when Yom Tov started, but when I say up to when Yom Tov started, I literally mean up to when Yom Tov started. Like candle lighting was 5:33 in Yerushalayim. Candle lighting is 40 minutes before Shkia. Literally, it stopped uploading to the podcast thing at like 6:10, like 3 minutes before Shkia, and it was insane. Otherwise that would have been the first time ever. That would have been the first time in nearly 6 years. It would have been the first time that there was not a daf available for that day. Anyways, so this is mamish been a crunch. And anyways, so here I am now, Motzei Simchas Torah, to now get the next stuff in. But this is Givaldi. This is what it's all about. This is what life is all about. This is what Simchas Torah is all about. And this is what Daf Yomi is all about. By hook or by crook, no matter what, rain, snow, whatever it is, we get these dafs out. So here we go. So today there are 3 sections. I actually prepared everything. As I was saying, I intended to record this yesterday if I wouldn't have run out of time. So I actually prepared all this stuff yesterday. But anyways, so there are 3 sections to this daf. The first being waking up Pigul. Okay, waking up Pigul. Okay, we'll have to explain what that means. Pigul technicalities. That sounds like fun. And finally, Pigul with foods not normally eaten. We had actually seen this at, where did we see this? We saw this, now I can't remember that this is the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. I don't know, my brain is fried. But we have seen this, we have seen this before. Anyways, friends, let us jump in to Daf Lamed Aleph, the Daf 31 of Masechta Zevachim. All right, friends, so we are going to begin on Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechta Zevachim, 3 lines in to the daf. Oh, and that's why I want. One more thing I want to say. So yesterday there weren't slides. I didn't have time to add the slides to the. There were slides. I'd prepared slides, but I didn't have time to incorporate them into the daf. So for anybody watching, if you're wondering why there weren't like slides, there was literally no time. I was doing everything as quickly as possible. Okay, anyways. Okay, so we're going to start on Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechta Zevachim on the 3rd line of the Daf. It was stated, Chatzi Zayis Chutz Lizmano, Chatzi Zayis Chutz Limkoma, Chatzi Zayis Chutz Lizmano, Amarova Vayikatz Ki Yoshin HaPigul. Rav Nuna Amar Erev Machshavis Have. Okay. I gotta like get back into like Pigul brains. Anyways, okay, so you have a guy, he slaughters, let's just say he's slaughtering a korban, and just to keep things simple, we'll go like Rabbi Yochanan from yesterday, that it could, I think that was yesterday, that it could be the same avodas. Let's say he slaughters his korban, he has intention that he's going to eat half a zayis of it, chutz lizmanu, so that's half a shear, and then half a zayis chutz limkomo. Okay, so we had said that those 2 things could join together and it would be pasul. But then he has, although actually interestingly, right, we saw according to Rabbi Yehuda, I believe, actually no, even there though, what would Rabbi Yehuda say there? I imagine Rabbi Yehuda would, I assume Rabbi Yehuda would say there though that since the shear is a combination, it would probably be possible there. I don't think he would say Tfos Lashon Rishon there. Anyways, I think so. Unless Rabbi Yehuda explicitly argued on the Mishnah, but I don't think so. I assume that Rabbi Yehuda would say that would be possible. Anyways, fine. Where are we? So you had a share of chatzi zayis. So you had in mind that he's going to eat half a zayis chutz lizmanu, and that he's going to eat half a zayis chutz limkomo. So normally that would be possible. But then he has kavana also to have another half a zayis chutz lizmanu. So now what happens? Because initially when he said chatzi zayis chutz lizmanu, so that was only half a shear, so that was nothing. That wasn't going to cause any trouble. But then he had in mind half a zayis chutz limkomo. So now there's a whole zayis. Half a zayis and half a zayis equals a whole zayis. Now that whole zayis would be possible because it's a combination of chutz lizmanu and chutz limkomo. So it's possible. But then he also has in mind another half a zayis chutz lizmanu. So the shaila is, can that second half a zayis chutz lizmanu join together with the first half a zayis that was chutz lizmanu to say actually it's not possible, it's pigul. Because a kazayis, right now you have a whole kazayis chutz lizmanu, only half a zayis chutz limkomo. But the thing is that at the time it was possible. When there was the initial half a zayis chutz lizmanu and the half a zayis chutz limkomo, so possible. So can that new development of half a zayis chutz lizmano, that third half a zayis chutz lizmano, join together with the first half a zayis and say it's no longer possible, it's taka pigul and there's a chiyuv kares? That's the shaila. Rava says that's exactly what happens, and it's pigul and there's a chiyuv kares. Rav Amnuna disagrees and says no. Once it became possible, it's possible the new development of the half a zayis chutz lizmano is not going to change that. It's going to remain pasul. Okay. So again, itmar, it was stated chatzi zayis chutz lizmano, chatzi zayis chutz limkomo. But then, so at this point, chatzi zayis chutz lizmano plus chatzi zayis chutz limkomo, so that would be pasul. The chatzi zayis chutz lizmano, but then nocha chatzi zayis has in mind for another chatzi zayis chutz lizmano. The shaila is, does it join together the first chatzi zayis? Omar rova vayikatz ki yoshin apigul. This is a play on a pasuk from Tilim which says vayikatz ki yoshin Hashem ki gibor misronin miyoyim. So it's a play on the pasuk of vayikatz ki yoshin Hashem. Here it says vayishan ki yoshin apigul. Okay, gewaldig. Basically, and that's why I named this chapter Waking Up Pigul. Can you wake up Pigul? According to Rava, you may. Well, you can. Right. Was it? You would ask your teacher, right? You would ask the teacher, can I go to the bathroom? And the classic teacher joke would be, may I go to? Of course you can go to. Okay, so how would that apply here? It would apply here because I don't know. Okay, so I think this would be a can situation. Can you wake up Pigul? Says Rava, yes, we can. Okay. Vayikatz ki yoshin Pigul. Rav Amnuna Omar eruv machshove save. Rav Amnuna says nisht. This is a kombina. This is a combination. We had the half a zayis of chutz lizmano, the half a zayis is chutz limkomo, and that's going to be pasul. The addition of the addition of an additional chatzi zayis chutz lizmano is not going to change its status from pasul to pigul. Okay, fine. Now, of course, when I say pigul right now, I'm referring to chutz lizmano, which is a chiyuv kares. Okay. Omar Rove mino amina lo, says Rove, and how do I know that I'm right? That the third half azayis chutz zmano makes the whole thing pigul. Ditnan, because we learn in a Mishnah from Masechta Tyrus. Okay, you can expect this to be fun. Kibeya oichol rishon v'kibeya oichol sheni shebolon zeboze rishon. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So I'm imagining like a dough here. It doesn't say that explicitly, but I'm imagining like a dough. So let's say you have an egg's worth of dough, and that dough, what do we say? It's a rishon and a sheni, right? Kibei oichel rishon, kibei oichel sheni. So let's say that first dough was touched by a sheretz, a dead sheretz. A dead sheretz is an avatuma. That first beya, that first egg's worth of dough, touched a dead sheretz. It's now a rishon l'tuma. The second beya of dough touched a rishon. Imagine it could even have touched the first dough. Why not? I don't see why that should matter, right? So you have the first dough is a kebeya, and therefore it could be mitame tumas ochlin, and it is a rishon, and it makes the second beya of dough a sheni. So now you have two kebeyas of dough. One's a rishon, one's a sheni. They mix together tzazamen. Now you have one dough. That's two kebeyas, right? You have one clump of dough right now. That clump of dough is made up 50% of dough that is a rishon and 50% of dough that is a sheni. And now it's one dough that you mix tzazamen. So the shaila is, how do we treat this dough? Is this dough a rishon or is it a sheni? The answer is, because there is a shiur, because there's a kabeya of dough that is a rishon, we'll treat it as a rishon, and it could be mitame ochlin, right? In the same way that a rishon could be mitame, as opposed to, if it was a sheni, it would only be able to be mitame truma or posel truma or mitame kodshim. We'll I think we'll get to the distinction between posel and mitame soon. We've seen it before. Anyways, so the point is we treat this dough as a rishon. Okay. So this nan kibeya, I'm reading again. Kibeya oichel rishon v'kibeya oichel sheni. If you have a kibeya of I'm going to go with dough, let's say, that is a rishon l'tumah, and a kibeya of dough that is a sheni l'tumah, shebolon zeboze, and you mix them tzazamen. Now you have one clump of dough, 50% rishon, 50% sheni. I hope that my scenario, that the dough scenario works. I don't know, unless dough is treated differently. But if it's not dough, then just swap it out for something that would work. I don't know what to tell you. So rishon, I don't know, unless you want to talk about M&Ms. I don't know. I don't know. Would M&Ms work? I don't know what works and doesn't. I haven't learned Masechta Tyrus yet, but I'll get there soon. I'm learning Mishnayos now, although I've obviously fallen behind with absolutely everything over the last few weeks. So I'm a few Mishnayos behind. I'm a few days behind on Mishnah, but that's not so difficult to catch up with. Anyways, Daf Yomi is much more difficult. Anyways, so right now we're Masechta. We're still Menachos with Mishnah Yomi, but we'll get to Tyrus. Hopefully I'll have a better grasp on these things. But I'll go upon him. Let's just stick with the dough example for now. So rishon. So we treat this dough as a rishon, the tumachilkon. Now, what if you divide the dough now in half? Well, we assume that half of each. So meaning the dough was two kibeyas, because you join together the two kibeya doughs. So the dough is two kibeyas. You divide it in half. You have one. Now you have two doughs. One's a kibeya and the other's a kibeya. But the assumption is, statistically speaking, 50% of one of each dough would be the rishon dough. 50% of it would be the sheni dough. Right? It's not that hard, right? You take this dough now, you cut it in half. The assumption is that, well, the dough is made up of a rishon dough and a sheni dough, and equal parts of each. So take this thing, after mixing it together, you divide it in half. Statistically speaking, around 50% right, of each dough is going to be from the original Rishon, and around 50% of the or whatever, statistically speaking, I guess 50% of each new dough would be from the Rishon dough, and 50% would be from the Sheni dough. So how do we view each clump of dough? Let's say let's call them Ruvain the dough and Shimon the dough. So we treat each one, so neither one has a shear. So certainly they're both tummy, right? Because they each right, Reuven the dough and Shimon the dough are both made up entirely of initially tummy doughs. One was a Rishon, one was a Sheni. So we assume that 50% of each dough is Rishon, 50% is Sheni. So now there isn't a full shear of either one of them, right? There isn't a full. There's only half a beya of the Rishon and half a beya of a Sheni. So therefore we have to go by the lowest common denominator, meaning it would be a Sheni L'tumah. It's only treated as a Sheni L'tumah, not as a Rishon L'tumah. Since it doesn't have a full shear of Rishon L'tumah, we treat it as the lower of them as a Sheni L'tumah. So again, Chilkan, so if you divide the dough in half, Zeh Sheni v'Zeh Sheni, so Reuven the dough and Shimon the dough would each be treated as Sheni L'tumahs. Now the implication being, Ha'chazav ve'ervan Rishon have. The implication being, and this is Rava saying, right, that Rava had said when you have the Pigul, you have half a zayis of chutz lizmano, half a zayis of chutz limkomo, which is possible now, but then you add the half a zayis of chutz lizmano, it now reinvigorates the initial chutz lizmano and makes it now Pigul and chiyuv kares. So similarly over here, we're saying that if you have this dough, which is a Rishon L'tumah, because it's made up of a beya of Rishon and a beya of Sheni, you divide it in half, and now we say, well, now there's only half a beya of each, so we have to treat it like a Sheni Tumah. But if you mix it again, if you mix it back together, well, then it returns to being a Rishon. So it's like the Rishon status was reawakened in the dough. Again, a chazav ve'ervan, if you now take Ruvain the Sheni, but Ruvain the dough and Shimon the dough, and join them back together to make, what would Ruvain the dough and Shimon the dough make? I don't know. Ruvain the dough and Shimon the dough joined together to make the dough of all doughs. So now you take Ruvain the dough and Shimon the dough and you mix them back together to make the dough of all doughs. So Rishon Have, it becomes once again a Rishon. The Rishon status is, so to speak, reawakened in the dough of all doughs. Mimai, and how do we know that joining together, mixing together Reuven the dough and Shimon the dough creates the dough of all doughs? Midiktani Seifa. From the fact that the Mishnah in Tyrus continues, Nafal ze be'atzmo v'ze be'atzmo al kikar shel truma psalua. That now, let's say you have a loaf of bread, and this loaf of bread is truma. This loaf of bread is truma. Okay. Now truma okay. So as I said a few minutes ago, that we're going to get to the distinction between pasul and tameh. We're saying here, who wants to explain to us how tumah works? Sort of the basics of tumah, how tumah works. Tumah is a very complicated thing, but on the surface of it, it's actually not that complicated. You have a hierarchy of tumah. What's the hierarchy? Well, you of course have avia avosa tumah, which is like a dead body. If someone comes into contact, but then you also have ava tumas. Let's kind of start there. Whatever, you have avia avosa tumah, which is a dead body, but you have all sorts of ava tumas, right? Dead sheretz, a zav, a mitzara, right? There's all sorts of ava tumas. Now, if an ava, it's a tmei mace, somebody who touches a corpse, becomes an ava tumah. Now, if an ava tumah could be metame even adam v'kelim. An ava tumah, like a dead sheretz, could be metame even people or vessels, and that person or vessel would be a rishon l'tumah. If a rishon l'tumah, now a rishon l'tumah cannot be metame other people and vessels, but it could be metame ochlin umashkin, right? the ochlin umashkin would become a sheni l'tumah. Right? A rishon l'tumah makes a sheni l'tumah. Now, what could become a shlishi? So so now we're getting more limited. So a sheni l'tumah cannot be matame other ochlin umashkin, but it can be matame truma. Truma can become a shlishi. Now the thing is that when it comes to truma, it can't make other truma tame. So basically what happens is it becomes puzzle at that point. Meaning, if we would say that it's tame, it means that it can be matame other things, but it can't. What's it going to be matame? I think if it touches kachim, I think it makes kachim a V. But anyways, basically, but as opposed to, let's say a rishon l'tumah, right? Let's say somebody touches a dead sheretz, and now they're a rishon l'tumah, and they touch truma, so the truma is going to be tameh. Why is it tameh? Well, because if that truma touches other truma, that truma will not be a shlishi. But once it's a shlishi, it's not considered tameh anymore. It's considered pasul, because that truma can't now be mitame any other truma. So at that, basically the buck stops there. So truma that's a shlishi is referred to as being pasul, as opposed to being tameh, because it can't be mitame anymore other truma. But if you have truma that's a sheni, it's not pasul, it's tameh, because it could be mitame other truma to be a shlishi, which at that point would be considered pasul. And that's what we're saying here, that if you have Ruvain the dough and Shimon the dough, which are each treated as a sheni l'tumah, and Ruvain the dough falls on a loaf of truma bread, right? Ruvain the dough and Shimon the dough are each a sheni l'tumah. They touch Ruvain the dough falls on a loaf of bread that's truma, so it'll make the loaf of bread a shlishi, i.e., it'll be pasul. And then, if Ruvain the dough is removed from the loaf of bread, and then Shimon the dough falls on it, again, it's still that dough is still going to remain a shlishi, i.e., pasul. It won't be able to be mitami other truma. Now, so again, it says in the Sefer, Nafal zeba atzmo v'zeba atzmo. If Ruvain the dough falls on a loaf of truma bread, and then Reuben the dough is removed from the bread, from on top of the bread, and then Shimon the dough falls on this bread of truma. So it becomes a shlishi, it becomes what's called pasul by truma. It's a shlishi, it can't be mitami other truma. However, naflu shnein ke'achas, but if Reuven the dough and Shimon the dough fall on top of this truma loaf of bread, tzazamin, together, well, now you once again have a full shear, a full beitza of, because they both fell on the dough together. They're now rejoined. They both fell on the loaf of truma bread together. They've rejoined, and now you actually have a beitza. You have a proper shear, a kebeya's worth of rishon bread. And Rishon is going to make that truma bread actually be a sheni l'tumah rather than a shlishi l'tumah, a sa'ua shniya. So then that truma bread is going to be a sheni l'tumah rather than a shlishi l'tumah, because it's now touching Ruvain the dough and Shimon the dough, which together form the dough of all doughs, which is a rishon l'tumah, making the truma bread a sheni rather than a shlishi. So Rave wants to argue from there that you see what happened when you had this dough that was a rishon, because it was made up of a kebeya of rishon dough and a kebeya of sheni dough, and they joined together to make the dough of all doughs, and the dough of all doughs is a rishon. It's then cut in half, and you have Reuven the dough and Shimon the dough. Each one is treated as a sheni because they each only have half a beya of rishon dough. But then when they join back together, the rishon status is reawakened, and it's treated now as a rishon l'tumah. And Rava wants to apply that to our scenario of the hafazayis of chutz lizmano followed by the half azayis of chutz limkomo, which together made as kazayis that was posel and no chiv kares, not pigul but posel. And then Rava wants to argue if he then has kavana, as machshava, to have another half azayis chutz lizmanu, Rava wants to argue that could reawaken the initial chatzi zayis of chutz lizmanu, and now you have one chatzi zayis chutz lizmanu plus another chatzi zayis chutz lizmanu, a full zayis chutz lizmanu. It should be pigul and a chiyuv kares. That's what Rava wants to argue. Rav Amnuna argues against Rav and says, meh. Hossam, when it came to Reuven the bread, Reuven the dough, Shimon the dough of all doughs. Hossam ika shi'ura, hachaleka shi'ura. Rav Amnuna says there's a big difference, and that big difference is that initially in the dough, there was a full shear, right? You had in the dough a beya of rishon dough. There was already a shear that could be matame as a rishon, and then it joined together with another kibeya of sheni dough, joined together into a dough of all doughs, which was a rishon, and it already milichatchila was treated as a rishon l'tuma. Again, then got cut in half, and then statistically we had to assume that each half only had half a beya of rishon, which is not a proper shear. But then when they came back and reunited, it just went back to its original state of having a shear that is a rishon. However, argues Rav Amnuna, in the case of the chatzi zayis chutz lizmano, there never was a full shear. There never was a zayis chutz lizmano. There was half a zayis chutz lizmano. When it joined together with the half a zayis of chutz limkomo, only then was there a shear, but that shear was puzzle. Adding another half a zayis of chutz lizmano is not going to change that. There never was a full shear of chutz lizmano, and therefore later on adding the second half a zayis of chutz lizmano is not going to change that. As opposed to by the case in Tyrus, there initially was the full shear. It was then divided in half, and there was no longer full shear. But then it reunited and went back. Chade shamenu kikedem, as I was told by there's a yid named. Oh man, what's his name? Liraz. There's a yid named Liraz. He's a Jew. An Israeli Jew who was severely injured in Syria just a few weeks ago, and I met him maybe a year ago or so, maybe half a year ago, I don't know, and I was with my chavrusa of mine, and my chavrusa, we were saying to him how we used to learn together, now we learn, then we stopped, now we're learning together again. So he said, Chade Shaminu Kikedim. That's what he told me the first time I met him. That's what he said to me. Chade Shaminu Kikedim. Yeah, he needs our help. If anybody wants to donate, I'll leave a link in the description, Taka. Why not? I'll leave a link in the description to the Daf. If anybody wants to donate, I don't know too many details. He may have lost his legs. I'll leave a link in the description if anybody wants to donate. Why not? He's a good yid, and I don't know. I kind of hope he didn't lose his legs, but he might have, defending Am Yisrael. So, anyways, so Chadeh Shemenu Kikedim. So you had the shear of a kibeya, and then you had a shear of Rishon L'Tumah, then you divide it in half, and now you rejoin it, so it goes back to being a Rishon L'Tumah. But Rav Nun argues that wouldn't apply to the case of the half azayis scenario with the chutz zmanu. Omer Rav Nun says, where do I know my argument from? Which is that when you have half azayis chutz zmanu, half azayis chutz limkomo, and now you have a kazayis 50% chutz lizmano, 50% chutz limkomo, it'll be pasul rather than pigul, and adding that half a zayis isn't going to change anything of chutz lizmano. This nan that we learned in a Mishnah, ha'oichel shenitma be'av atuma v'shenitma bevlad atuma mitzdarfin zemzeh. So if you have a ochel that is half a beit, so Rashi actually has that curious of ochel chatzi beitza shenitma be'av atuma. Okay, fine. Akasha's name, yeah. Okay, so it says of Amnuna, right, that we have a mission that says ha'ochel shenitma ba'av atuma. So if you have half a beitza, half a shear, that shenitma ba'av atuma, i.e. it's a rishon atuma. You have half a beitza of a rishon atuma, v'shenitma b'vlad atuma, and half a beitza of something that became tummy from a vlad atuma. Vlad atuma would be like a rishon atuma, became tummy from rishon atuma, i.e. a sheni atuma. So you have half a beitza of rishon atuma, half a beitza of sheni atuma, mitzdarfin zeim zeh litame kikal shebishneim. So they could join tzazamin. But when they join together, so let's just use our dough example. So you have half a beitza of dough that's a rishon, half a beitza of dough that's a sheni. They join tzazamin to make a kibeya of dough, but it's 50% rishon, 50% sheni. So we treat it like the more, right, like the lesser of the tumas, i.e. as a sheni. And my lab, Rav Amnuna argues, Havagad the harder malye. What if now you add another half a beitza of rishon? Rav Amnuna wants to argue it wouldn't make a difference. That once you have half a beitza of rishon, half a beitza of sheni, you join them to tzazamin, then you have a full beitza, 50% rishon, 50% sheni. We treat it as a sheni, and that's not going to change, argues Rav Amnuna, even if you add another half a beitza of rishon. To which the Gemara says, not exactly a rock solid proof, because you could argue that Mishnah is Davka talking about the reason why it's a sheni is because you didn't actually add another half a beya. If you would have added another half a beya of rishon, maybe it would have become now a rishon, like Rava would argue and say that vayikatz, what was it called? Vayikatz ki yoshein ha rishon, or whatever you would say in this case. So again, it's not exactly definitive proof. Rava would argue that if you add another half a beya of rishon, it would make it a rishon once again. So not like a rock solid raya for Rav Amnuna. Because Rav Dimi Omar, when Rav Dimi came, he said, Chatzi zayis chutz limkomo, v'chatzi zayis chutz lizmano, v'chatzi zayis chutz lizmano. What do you guys say? It's an interesting scenario. So if half a zay is chutz limkomo, half a zay is chutz lizmano, and then another half a zay is chutz lizmano. It's an interesting scenario, right? Why is it interesting? Because on the one hand, you have the two half a zayises chutz lizmano. So on the one hand, you have a full zayis chutz lizmano, but initially you had that half a zayis chutz limkomo followed by half a zayis chutz lizmano. Maybe that together would have made it puzzle, because you have a full zayis, half with machshavas chutz limkomo, half machshavas chutz lizmano. And then the shaila is, when you now have another chutz lizmano, can that change it from being puzzle to being pigul? But at the same time, the two chutz lizmanos were next to each other, so maybe milichatchila it's just pigul. That's the shaila. So Tani bar kapar pigul. Ein chazizayis mo'il b'makom kazayis. So bar kapar says taka would be pigul. Taka it would be pigul, not puzzle, because at the end of the day, you have a full zayis of chutz lizmano versus half a zayis of chutz limkomo, and therefore it will treat it as chutz lizmano, and it will be a chiyuv kares. Because of Ravin, but when Ravin came, he disagreed and said, no. In that case, it would be possible, because when you initially had the half a zayis of chutz limkomo followed by the half a zayis of chutz lizmano, it became possible. And then adding another chutz lizmano can't change that. So Kielsa Ravin, Omar, he said, Chatzi zayis chutz lizmano. So rather, the scenario is if you have chatzi zayis chutz lizmano, v'chatzi zayis chutz lizmano, v'chatzi zayis chutz limkomo. So if you have chatzi zayis chutz lizmano followed by chatzi zayis chutz lizmano, followed by chatzi zayis chutz limkomo, Tony bar kapara pigul. Ein chatzi zayis mo b'makom kazayis. Bar kapara says in that case we'll say pigul, because in that case we could say, well, you have those two kazesim of chutz lizmano. So and then you have half a zayis of chutz limkomo. That half a zayis is going to be relevant. Of chutz limkomo is going to be relevant since you have a full zayis. I'm sorry, the half a zayis of chutz limkomo is going to be irrelevant since you have a full zayis of chutz lizmano, and therefore it will be pigul, and there will be a chiyuv kares. Ravashi actually teaches it like this: chatzi zayis chutz lizmano. If you have half a zayis of chutz lizmano, and then it joins together with the kazayis chetzu chutz limkomo of chetzu chutz lizmano. So here you already had a kazayis. Right, there was already a machshava on a kazayis, 50% of which was to be chutz lizmano and 50% chutz limkomo. So you had a full shear of 50% chutz lizmano, 50% chutz limkomo, which would be puzzle. But then added to that shear is half a zayis of chutz lizmano. So the question is, can we now say, well, now we have a full zayis of chutz lizmano? So Tani Bakapara teaches pigul, that it would be pigul, because yes, we do combine the two half zayises of chutz lizmano, ein chatzi zayis mo b'makom kazayis, and we say that the half zayis of chutz limkomo would be unable to stand up to the full zayis of chutz lizmano, and we treat it as pigul, and this would be like Rava, right? That basically the half zayis of chutz lizmano would be able to reawaken the half zayis of chutz lizmano in that initial combination of chutz lizmano and chutz limkomo. Vayikatz ki yoshen hapigul. What a line! And now we move on to the next section of the daf, pigul technicalities. Okay, so just a lot of these kinds of things of like, is it pigul? Isn't it pigul? Amar B'yanis is Rabbi Chishev shochlu klovim lemocher. So it says Rabbi Yanai, if he slaughtered, let's say, a korban with the intention that dogs are going to eat it tomorrow, not that he's going to eat it tomorrow, but that dogs are going to eat it tomorrow. Pigul, it's pigul. So we see that the Pasuk says yochlu aklovim, that the eating of the dogs is considered achila, and therefore it's achila chutz lizmano, and it's pigul. Maskif lo Rabbi Ami asks, but ela me'ato chishev she'toichleu eish lemachar. Well then, what if somebody slaughters a korban with the intention that it should be eaten tomorrow by fire? Would that also be pigul? We have a pasuk where eish, the consumption of eish, is referred to as achila. So therefore, if a person slaughters a korban with the intention of that a fire should eat it, would that also be pigul? Hachinami the pigul, is that also pigul? V'chitema hachinami, and if you can say, yeah, it is pigul, but now we learn in the Mishnah, lechol kachatzi zayis ulaktir kachatzi zayis, that we learned in the Mishnah that if the intention was to eat half a zayis tomorrow and to burn half a zayis tomorrow, kosher. The korban is kosher, shein achila v'aktara mitzdarfin, because achila and aktara don't join together, which means that clearly burning is not a form of achila. We're saying that it can't join together. So clearly burning is not a form of achila, and therefore if you slaughter an animal with the intention of fire burning it tomorrow, or fire eating it tomorrow, or whatever, should not count as achila. Because if it does, then half a zayis, to eat half a zayis tomorrow and to burn half a zayis tomorrow should be able to join together, because after all, it's a type of achila. Well, here's the thing. It depends how he says it. When we say that half a zayis, right, that the intention of eating half a zayis tomorrow and burning half a zayis tomorrow don't join together, it's because you refer to burning it as burning, not as consuming. Right? If he would say to eat it, that the fire should eat it tomorrow, well then it would be treated as eating. So achinami keva achav ma'eskinon, either apka b'loshen achila, achinami achav ma'eskinon dapka b'loshen aktara. The reason why when the Mishnah says, as I just explained, the reason why when the Mishnah says that when he slaughters a korban with the intention of eating half a zayis tomorrow and burning half a zayis tomorrow, doesn't join together to create pigul, because he referred to the burning as burning, not as eating. But if one would slaughter a korban with the intention of fire eating it tomorrow, from here we would say, it sounds like we would say that would be pigul, because he's referring to the consumption of the fire as eating. But Ravashi asks, what if he slaughters a korban with the intention that two people are going to eat one zayis tomorrow? So do we say it's based on the thought that he had, which was that a kazayis will be eaten chutz lizmanu, or do we go based on the eaters, and each eater is only going to be eating half a zayis, and therefore we wouldn't have the proper shir? Amar Abaye says, Abaye tashma lecho kachatzi zayis ulaktir kachatzi zayis kosher she'ein achil v'aktor mistafen. Says Abaye, look, it says in our Mishnah that if he intends to eat half a zayis tomorrow and to burn half a zayis tomorrow, in that case they don't join together, because eating and burning are incompatible. However, the implication is, okay, eating and burning are incompatible. But, so we'd say eating and burning is incompatible, but eating and eating, that, right, in a similar way, meaning, right, dumya telecho v'la'aktir, just like when we're saying eating and burning, we're talking about eating, the intention to eat half a zayis tomorrow and to burn half a zayis tomorrow. So you're also eating and eating, i.e., with the intention of half a zayis to eat and half a zayis to eat. What would this half a zayis to eat and half a zayis to eat be? Two people, with the intention that two people are each going to eat half a zayis. Mitzdarif, they would join together. Shma mina. So meaning, the Mishnah says, to eat half a zayis and to burn half a zayis, that's incompatible. But to eat half a zayis and to eat half a zayis, two eatings, is compatible. What does it mean to eat and to eat? Two people. This one eats half a zayis, that one eats half a zayis. We're saying in that case it would be compatible. Eating and burning, incompatible. Eating and eating, compatible. So therefore, says Abaye, that would be considered pigul. Shmamina, fine. By Rava asks, Chishev lechol kazayis biyosim k'dei achilas prasmao. What if asks Rava, what if a person slaughters a korban with the intention of eating it tomorrow, but with the intention of specifically eating it slowly, too slowly? Because as we know, when it comes to achila, or let's say when it comes to birkas hamazon, I believe, right? If you have to eat bread, if you just eat little tiny morsels of bread spread out over a long time, I don't think you would have to bench on that, right? I think you have to. The point is, when it comes to achila, it needs to be bichdei achilas pras. You have to eat it in the amount of time that it eats to eat half a loaf of 4 eggs within a few minutes. So if you davka slaughter, if a person slaughters a korban with the intention of eating it tomorrow, but very slowly, more than the kedei achilas pras, more than just over a few minutes, the shaila is, would that be considered pigul? So again, by Rava chishev lechol kazayis, if you intend to eat a kazayis, but biyosim chdei achilas pras, but to eat it really slowly, more than the amount of time that it takes to eat achilas pras, mao, what's the halacha? Achilas gavoa midaminon lei, do we treat it like achilas gavoa, like when you burn things on the mizbeach? When you burn things on the mizbeach, sometimes it could take some time to burn it. And therefore, even though his intention was for longer than achilas pras, it would still be pigul. Or do we treat it like the eating of regular people, i.e., it would have to be bichdei achilas pras? Amar Abaye tashma, says Abaye, come in here, lecho kachatzi zayis ulaktir kachatzi zayis kosher she'en achila v'aktor mitzvah. Says Abaye, well, our Mishnah said that if he intends to eat half a zayis and to burn half a zayis, those are incompatible. And it would not be pigul, because eating and burning are incompatible. Time of the lecho lahaktir, halecho v'lecho mitzayif. What's this? V'lecho dumya de lahaktir mitzayif, right? But to eat and to burn are incompatible. But to eat in a way that's similar to burning, meaning to eat and to burn, is incompatible. But to eat, even if that eating is in a way that is similar to burning, mitzdarif, v'aktara b'yotzim echta achilas prasu, and burning could take longer than achilas prasu. It could take time. And therefore I would say that, okay, eating and burning is not mitzdarif, but if you're just eating, even if you're eating in a way that is similar to burning, i.e. longer than achilas pras, it would be pigul. Deal with besek gadol. Not necessarily, because maybe dafka, when we compare it to burning, we're talking about a big fire that would burn really quickly within achilas pras, and maybe the eating would have to be k'dei achilas pras. So I guess maybe if one slaughtered a korban with the intention of eating it tomorrow, but long yosem k'dei achilas pras, maybe it would not be pigul. It would have to be k'dei achilas pras. Okay, it sounds like maybe that's a little bit inconclusive over there. Okay, now we get up to the final section of today's daf. Pigul with foods not normally eaten. So the Mishnah had said, Lecho kachatzizai, laktu kachatzizai is kosher, as we've been referencing, that the Mishnah had said that if somebody, let's say, slaughters an animal with the intention of eating half a zayis and burning half a zayis, let's say chutz lezmano, kosher, the korban is kosher because eating and burning are incompatible. Time of the lecho laaktir, or lecho v'lecho, darshen darku lecho mitzdaref. Okay, no. So I'm going to read that again. Time of the lecho laaktir. Okay, so similar to like the arguments that we've been seeing from Abaye recently, that eating and burning are incompatible, but eating and eating are compatible, even if that eating is going to be something that is not normally eating. For example, eating the emurim, which is supposed to burn, but he's eating them. We're saying, look, the intention to eat half a zayis tomorrow and to burn half a zayis tomorrow is incompatible. To eat, even if the thing that you're planning to eat is something that is not normally eaten, would be pigul. So again, time of the lecho v'lahaktir. The reason why it's incompatible is because you're talking about eating and burning. Halechol, but to eat, v'lechol darshen darku lechol, and to eat even something that you wouldn't normally eat, mitzdarif, those two can join together. Hakatani reisha lechol es shedarku lechol in, shein darku lechol lo. But one second, if we go back to the beginning of the Mishnah, it had said, right, I'm reading from the Mishnah, talking about things that are normally eaten. So again, Akatani Reisha lecho es shedarko lechol. Es shedarko lechol in, es shein darko lechol lo. So it sounds like we're talking about things that you normally eat. So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Hamani, Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, well, this part of the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer. Right? The implication being that even eating things that you're not that you wouldn't normally eat would still be pigul. That's Rabbi Eliezer. The Omar Mechash Marchilas Ad Machiz Mizbeach, as we saw in Daf Chavches, by the height of the Aliyah, that Rabbi Eliezer says that you can even be chayiv pigul with the intention to eat something that is normally burned, or the intention to burn something that's normally eaten. Right? Again, Rabbi Eliezer the Amar Mechash Marchilas Ad Machilas Mizbeach Mizbeach Achilas Adam. Right? Mechash Marchilas Ad Machilas Mizbeach. So I think that one would probably be that even if you intend to burn, let's say, the meat, it would be pigul, right, tomorrow. Or for something that's normally burnt for human consumption, it would still be piguls, i.e. like to eat the emurin. If somebody slaughters a korban with the intention to eat something that isn't normally eaten, like the emurin, you're supposed to burn them, not to eat them. Or to burn something which isn't normally burnt, like, for example, the meat. You're supposed to eat the meat, not burn the meat. Kosher. So Tanakama says, okay, that is not pigul. The korban is kosher, but Rabbi Eliezer posel. Rabbi Eliezer says the korban is posel. So we see that according to Rabbi Eliezer, even the intention to eat something that is not normally eaten, like the emurin, could still be pigul. So therefore, the sefer of our Mishnah that says that if that to eat half his eyes and to burn half his eyes, implying that to eat half his eyes and to eat half his eyes, even if it's something that you wouldn't normally eat, it's possible. It's pigul. So that would be Rabbi Eliezer. Abaye says, Abaye, Filutem Rabban, you can even say that this part of the mission is the Rabbanon, right? That we're saying to eat and to burn are incompatible. That's also the rabbis. Filotema halechol v'lechol davar shedarko lechol. Don't make that diuk that we just made a few minutes ago. Don't say that, well, eating and burning are incompatible, but eating and eating even something that you don't normally eat are compatible. No, don't say that. They're if you don't normally eat it, possible, like it's a kosher kilo, it won't be pigul, according to the rabbis. So rather say, eating things that you normally eat would be pigul. My kamash malon. But then what's the big chiddush? Eating things that you normally eat would be pigul? Of course they would be pigul. If we're talking about things that you normally eat, we already know that from earlier. Puzzle. That, right, again, puzzle. We had said that if you intend to eat a apazayis bachutz, chutzim kamom, kachatizayis l'machar puzzle, right? If you intend to eat hafazayis chutzim kamom, hafazayis chutz lizmano, so we already know that would be puzzle. You would not be chayv kares. But if it was the opposite, chatzizayis chutz lizmano, chatzizayis chutzim kamom, and we're talking about things that you normally eat, so of course it would be pigul. So we already know this. So like right. So we don't need to learn this again, right? Meaning we're saying half a zayis, right? A person slaughters a korban with the intention of eating half a zayis, with eating half a zayis tomorrow and burning half a zayis tomorrow. And if we're saying that, okay, eating half a zayis and burning half a zayis are incompatible, but eating half a zayis chutz lizmano and eating apazayis chutz limkomo of things that you normally eat would be pigul, but we already know that because we said earlier, we already just said that earlier, that eating apazayis chutz lizmano and apazayis chutz limkomo would be pigul. We said that earlier. Ilechol v'la'akter. And if all it's coming to teach is literally what it's coming to teach, that slaughtering a korban with the intention of eating apazayis and burning apazayis are incompatible, that's what it's coming to teach. I don't need to teach him that. Midukya dereisha shmamina. I can infer that from earlier in the Mishnah. Lechol davar shedarko lechol in shein darko lechol lo. That we had said earlier that, right, earlier in the Mishnah we had said that if you intend to eat something that is normally eaten, so we said that if you intend, earlier in the Mishnah we said that if a person slaughters a korban with the intention to eat things that, right, right, that's literally what it said, right? Something that's normally eaten would be pigul, but implying that something that's not normally eaten, right, like a murin, would not be pigul. So now we say, look, Hashta umalechol v'lechol davar she'en darko lechol lo mitzdarif. Well, then obviously, if we're saying that in order for it to be pigul, it has to be dafka something that is normally eaten, but the intention to eat something that is not normally eaten would not be pigul. Well, then certainly, if you, let's say, intend to eat half a zayis of that which is normally eaten, and half a zayis which is not normally eaten doesn't join together, certainly half a zayis which is eaten and half a zayis which is bichlal not eaten at all but is burned is going to be completely incompatible. Lecho laktimi bai, right? If two types of eating, right, half a zayis that you normally eat and half a zayis that you don't normally eat, are incompatible. Two types of eating are incompatible. Certainly eating and burning are going to be incompatible. So from the diuk of the Reisha, I already know that half a zayis to eat, half a zayis to burn are incompatible. So again, why does the Sefer need to teach me that? So lechol akdir itzrich. Actually, the Sefer does need to teach me half a zayis to eat and half a zayis to burn. Because Agadati Chamina, I may have thought, look, when a person intends to eat half a zayis of that which is normally eaten, half a zayis of that which is not normally eaten, he's doing something abnormal. So it's not mitzvah if they're incompatible. But I could argue, but over here, I could argue that over here, where eating half a zayis of that which is normally eaten and burning half a zayis of that which is normally burnt, since you're doing each thing in its normal way, you're eating what's normally eaten, burning what's normally burnt. So maybe they can join together. Kamash blunt. So the Mishnah teaches, no, they can't. But it wouldn't be obvious. I wouldn't take that for granted, that the intention to eat half a zayis and to burn half a zayis are incompatible. The Mishnah had to teach us that they're incompatible. We'll come back to Perak Kol Zvachim Shekiblu Daman. This was good timing because my voice is starting to get dry. So in Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechta Zvachim, we first learned about waking up Pigul. Rava says, wake up. Right? Rava says if you have intention to eat half a zayis chutz zmano, half a zayis chutz koma, another half a zayis chutz zmano, the two half a zayises could join together, and even though the half a zayis chutz zmano, half a zayis chutz koma would be puzzle rather than pigul, but when you now add another half a zayis, it reinvigorates rejuvenates the original half a zayis of chutz zmano, and you have a full zayis of chutz zmano, and it'll be pigul. Whereas Rav Nuna says, nope. Rav Nuna says once you have the half a zayis chutz zmano, half a zayis chutz koma, and it's puzzle, the addition of the half a zayis chutz zmano is not going to change that. It remains puzzle. A whole bunch of pigul technicalities, intention for a dog to eat it, for it to be consumed by fire, for two people to eat it, all sorts of things like that. And pigul with foods not normally eaten, Rabbi Eliezer says, even with things that are not normally eaten, it would be pigul. The Chacham say it would not be pigul. And we kind of, got into that with our Mishnah in terms of half a zayis chutz zmano, half a zayis to burn, right? Half a zayis to eat a chutz zmano, half a zayis to burn a chutz zmano. What is that? His implication? We're talking about the things that are normally eaten or not. Basically, we said we could explain it either way, either things that are not normally eaten, like Rabbi Eliezer, or things that are normally eaten. We can even say, like the Chachamim. That was Daf Lamed Aleph of Masechta Zvachim. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.